Hello and welcome to EBC World, the voice of Pan-Africanism, with the latest news highlights of the hour. I am Tabitha John. To stay with us, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed stated that Ethiopia has intensified urban farming as part of a sustainable urban livelihood strategy with a clear understanding of its transformative potential. Urban farming not only boosts the agricultural sector, but also drives the urban economy and creates jobs. It enhances national food security, supports urban development, and connects consumers directly to local farms, the Prime Minister noted on his social media post. By using space more efficiently through practices like vertical farming and utilizing recycled materials, we are maximizing productivity while minimizing environmental impact, the Premier remarked, adding across the country these initiatives are already showing impressive results, proving the power of urban farming to reshape our cities and strengthen our economies. The Prime Minister called on those already engaged in urban farming to further intensify their efforts and encourage others to take part in the growing movement for a more sustainable urban future. Ethiopia calls on Egypt to stop categorically rejecting Ethiopia's efforts to ensure a dignified life for its people. On his right of reply against a statement delivered by a representative of Egypt at the UN Assembly, Ethiopian representative urged Egypt to choose the path of negotiation and international law by immediately ceasing its destabilizing efforts in the Horn of Africa. The representative also encouraged Egypt to ratify the Cooperative Framework Agreement on the River Nile as it will get into force on the 13th of October 2024. Johannes Fantahun has the following account.
The extensive statement by Egypt's representative can be summarized in short as categorically rejection of our efforts to ensure dignified life to our people.
Also, Ethiopia and Egypt do not share border. With their long history of state building, both countries are linked through the River Nile and other historic sentiments. But after Ethiopia started building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the River Abai, one of the major tributaries of Nile, Egyptian government is playing an antagonistic role in the region.
የባለቤትነት ማረጋገጫ ካርታችን ነው።
As usual in this year's UN Assembly, Ethiopia continued to call for equitable and reasonable share of transboundary water sources.
While we share no border, Ethiopia is linked with Egypt through the Nile. We believe Nile is a solemn nexus between our countries that ought to create shared peace and prosperity to the people of our sisterly countries. It's never Ethiopia's intention or conduct to create tension and hostility towards Egypt.
Speaking about Ethiopia's right to use its natural resources in line with the universally accepted principles of permanent sovereignty of states over their natural resources and the right to use them for the benefit of their people, he said the following.
Egypt's position against the universally accepted principle of permanent sovereignty of states over their natural resource and their right to use it for the benefit of their people. The people of Ethiopia, using their own finances, built the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The dam is built over the river Abai, which, as correctly explained by the representative of Egypt, is a tributary to the river Nile. It is bringing light to millions of Ethiopians deprived of such basic necessity. It is bringing integration to our region through energy, trade, and connectivity. The river Abai traverses 2/3 of Ethiopia's territory and makes up 70% of Ethiopia's water resource. While having the resource, the people of Ethiopia continue to live in food and energy insecurity. More than half of our 120 million population needs access to clean water and electricity. Ethiopia will not be told to hold its effort to alleviate this unacceptable circumstance.
On his right of reply against the statement delivered by a representative of Egypt in the UN Assembly, Ethiopian representative urged Egypt to choose the path of negotiation and international law by immediately stopping its destabilizing efforts in the Horn of Africa.
Ethiopia calls on Egypt to immediately stop its destabilization efforts in the Horn of Africa. Time to negotiate and find a win-win solution is now. We urge Egypt to choose the path of negotiation and the path of international law. The Cooperative Framework Agreement on the Nile River is entering into force on 13th October 2024. Egypt has the golden opportunity to return to peaceful conduct of its relations with the Nile River riparian states. Egypt is thus encouraged to ratify the CFA and play a constructive role in regional development.
The veteran diplomat, Ambassador Turuna Zeina, underscored that Egypt needs to reassess the colonial-era foreign policy it is pursuing against Ethiopia's development rights on the Abai Nile River. Ethiopia has been reiterating its unwavering aspiration for an equitable and reasonable use of water resources for its development endeavors without causing harm on downstream countries. In an exclusive interview with ENA, Ambassador Turuna Zeina said Ethiopia has already embarked on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam GERD to meet its excessive energy demands and integrate the East African region through power by developing the Abai River. The diplomat recalled that Egypt has witnessed unprecedented and unwarranted accusations from Egypt over the last 13 years. Turuna believed that Egypt pursued a policy of antagonism for centuries to keep Ethiopia weak. Listen to this.
The problem with Egypt is that they want to keep Ethiopia weak forever. That they have been doing that for say 100 years. No, that didn't start yesterday. But that is not correct. Ethiopia always resisted.
Noting that Ethiopia realizes the importance of cooperation on this largest river flow, Turuna indicated that it has been now starting to utilize its water resources based on the international law without causing significant harm on others. However, Egypt has been still pursuing distorted foreign policy towards Ethiopia to undermine its rights on the Nile River, he noted.
Egypt is doing the same for 100 years. That's not helpful. That is not good for Ethiopia. That is not good in Egypt, for Egypt. Egypt and Ethiopia can, as big, as old, and a bigger country in the region, they can cooperate for development of the region, peace and security of the region, not to destabilize countries in the region. This is not expected from them.
Meanwhile, Ethiopia is doing a great job in that regard, he said, adding it waited for many decades to meet the aspiration of utilizing its natural resources for development. Ethiopia has witnessed numerous allegations following the laying of the cornerstone for the construction of GERD on the Abai River from day one, just to address its electric power shortages to the veteran diplomat.
Once it generates electricity, the water goes to Egypt without any hindrance. So Egypt do understand that very well, but her problem is the policy that she maintains for 100 years. Weaken Ethiopia. Why? You know, this is 21st century. Countries can work together, develop together, cooperate together, you know, and, help others and help themselves too.
Realizing that such a vain exercise will never bear fruit, the veteran diplomat strongly urged Egypt to stop negative approaches against Ethiopia and its futile attempt to weaken the country.
በጣም ገብተን አንድ ቀን ሁለት ቀን አንወጣም 4-5 ቀን እዛ አድረን ነው
ይሄንን ከኔ ጋር አቋርጣችሁ እዛ መድረስ ከቻላችሁ በተፈጥሮ ደን ውስጥ የተሸሸገውን ውብ ሐይቅ አብራችሁ ትመለከታላችሁ።
እጅግ እምቅ ተፈጥሮ ሀብት ያለ አካባቢ ነው።
ሐይቁ ዳርቻ ነው የምናድረው። ምሽቱን እሳት እናነዳለን። ጥሩ ጊዜ ይኖረናል።
And finally, the International Energy Agency, IEA, in its Africa Energy Outlook 2019, stated that Africa's energy demand is expected to grow by about 45% between now and 2040, and fossil fuels will comprise about 54% of the continent's primary energy mix by that time. Approached by EBC World Executive Secretary at African Refiners and Distributors Association, Anibor Kraga, disclosed that the growing population and economic development will be driving forces for energy demand across the continent, which needs a robust plan to balance energy transition with energy security in order to maximize refining of African crude oil in the refineries across the continent. Tigger Sarnisa has sat down with the Executive Secretary. Take a look.
Thank you so very much, sir, for availing yourself for this interview. Executive Secretary Anibor Kraga, let's start off with this. Describe for us the importance, impact of energy consumption in Africa.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm very happy to be back in Addis after a couple of years. In fact, we just finished one of ARDA's key initiatives, which is a storage and distribution and jet fuel forum, which was held right here in the lovely Skylight Hotel in Addis. And it's one of the things that ARDA does to kind of underscore the need for our key objectives. Our key objectives are to provide a unified voice to all stakeholders across the continent, but also to promote African energy security. And the question you asked is very important. When you look at the numbers, the International Energy Agency Africa Energy Outlook 2019 was very clear. For Africa, demand is going to grow about 45%, other estimates about 50% between now and 2040. When you break down that primary energy mix over that period, by 2040, we're still going to have about 60% of that primary energy mix be still fossil fuel related products, coal, natural gas, and oil. Over that same period, 1 in 2 people born globally is going to be African. I'll repeat that again. 1 in 2 people born globally is going to be African. What that means is that by 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world will be in Africa, and Africa will have 3 of the top 10 most populous nations: Nigeria at number 3, I think the DRC at number 6, and Ethiopia, of course, at number 9. What does that mean? Increased population growth, increased economic development, and urbanization is going to drive this energy demand. So it's very important that we look at how we're going to balance energy transition, which is very key right now, with energy security for our citizens on the continent. And that's what ARDA is really working on. When you look at the forecasts over the same period, you will see that between now and 2040, clean products demand, which is essentially gasoline, LPG, diesel, and all of that, is expected to grow about 56% to just over 142 million metric tons of products by that time. Now, between now and then, over the next few years, with the Dangote refinery in Nigeria coming on stream, a couple of other projects like Centaur in Ghana, the Unok refinery in Uganda coming on stream, we're going to have a bit of respite. However, the shortfall between what is produced on the continent and what is needed to be imports is going to grow significantly. So we at ARDA are committed to ensuring that we come up with a robust plan for how we're going to balance energy transition with energy security, making sure we maximize refining of African crude oil in our refineries on the continent and putting in place the right storage and distribution infrastructure to deliver those products to various parts of the continent, whether it's coastal countries like Nigeria or landlocked countries like Ethiopia, to make sure all citizens of Africa can get the energy they require as necessary.
Let's now delve deep into the energy demand, which is expected to surpass 45%. What needs to be done from public partners or government meeting this demand, do you think?
Well, it's an interesting point. You know, the key word everybody talks about is investment. We need to bring investments on the continent. But I think to really put it in perspective, with the question you asked, there are 5 steps in the process. And when we talk of investments, people are talking of funding, financing, but in my view, and which is what we're driving at, that's the 5th stage of the process. The very first stage is regulation. Do we have the regulations in place to support investments by investors over the investment horizon? We've been talking of between now and 2040. That's not a 1-year, 2-year, 5-year decision. So do we have the regulations in place, and are the governments putting in place the enabling environment and the regulations to put those in place? The second point after that is project preparation. How do we have clear line of sight to the scope, cost, and schedule of the projects we're trying to put in place? Or do we have wish lists of what we would like there? We need to ensure that we engage in the right level of project preparation to define what we need in terms of projects and the investment amounts. And the third point is, of course, is a keyword these days, ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Are we building those into the projects that we're putting in place over that period to ensure that we are meeting energy demand, but we're doing it with the lowest possible carbon footprint and decarbonizing existing assets to meet that demand? The fourth, which is a very important point, is human capital development. People drive businesses and not the other way around. Are we going to have the right human capital in place over that period to deliver and meet those business results? When you have those first 4 things, the regulations to support business and the enabling environment, when you're clear on the projects that you want to deliver, when you're putting an ESG overlay and you have the human capital, only then will you get the capital that you need. So that's kind of what we need to work on and be intentional in our approach to attracting the investments on the continent by meeting those 5 key steps that I mentioned.
Anibal Karaga, Executive Secretary for African Refiners Association in Distributions. Thank you so very much for availing yourself for this interview. We do appreciate it.
You're watching ABC World, a reminder of the top stories. Ethiopia called on Egypt to stop categorically rejecting Ethiopia's efforts to ensure a dignified life for its people. And the African Refiners and Distributors Association calls for a robust plan to balance energy transition with energy security to maximize refining of African crude oil. That's all we had for now. I'm Tabitha John. Many thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.